Today I'm on the River Trent at Dunham Bridge. Dunham Bridge is probably about a mile up the river. I'm actually on the Lauterton stretch on the tidal river. Now when I say it's tidal, today we've actually got a split tide. The water will start to run back in about sort of half an hour's time and the river will start to fill up. You'll notice that I've set my equipment up slightly up the bank because this river will rise gradually, probably about a metre during the day. When it's a split tide, once the river starts to turn and run out, this is the best period for fishing with a ground bait feeder. Ground bait feeder on this river works ever so well for catching roach, skimmers, odd bream, and hopefully today will be a good day. I fished a match here at the weekend and the match wasn't too clever because the water had run very clear and the water was down for part of the match. Today on the split tide, we've also had quite a bit of rain yesterday. I'm sure that the river will fish quite well. Now I've actually grown up on this river. If there were one place that I wanted to fish for the rest of my life, it would be the River Trent. And the River Trent in its early days, I started fishing here when I was just 16 years old, was very, very good fishing. But I think now there's even more fish in the river than what there were back then. I mean, I think anglers sometimes look through rose-tinted glasses and they think that, you know, years ago the river was full of fish. But I can tell you now, there's more fish in the river now than what there's ever been. I actually fished it on a national championships last year and the run-up to the match was very good. There was some fantastic weights on the river. So, to look at the fishing, all I'm going to do, I'm going to fish with a ground bait feeder where I'm only going to fish about a third out from the bank, and this is because most of the flow, we're just off a bend here at Lauterton and the main flow is quite close to the bank, about a third out into the river. So that's what I'm going to do today. So let's have a look at the ground bait that I'm going to mix to use on this session. Today I'm using two ground baits. I'm using a simple brown crumb mix, but it's not your normal shop bought brown crumb. I'm using the census brown crumb, which is much darker and quite coarse. Today I'm fishing for quite big quality fish. I'm fishing for some good roach, hopefully an odd skimmer. I might even catch a bream along the way. So the brown crumb that I'm using, the census brown crumb, it's not as sticky as what our brown crumb is. When you buy a normal bag of brown crumb from England, it's quite sticky. This is much coarser and doesn't stick together quite the same. The French bread is quite different to our English bread. So that's the first ground bait that I'm going to use, just the normal census brown crumb. So I'm just going to add a bag of this into the bowl. Now because the ground bait's quite coarse and dark in colour, it just matches the bottom a lot better. Here today the river is quite clear. We did have some rain yesterday, as I've already said, and the water will just be slightly more coloured than normal. So just a dark brown mix is perfect for what I want to use today. I'm not keen on using black type ground baits on the river. I always think that fish on this river, they're quite aggressive, they're moving about all the time, and a lighter coloured mix they pick up on much quicker than a dark or a black type mix. So that's the census brown crumb, very coarse, and that's the first part of the mix. The other ground bait I'm going to use is Census Magic. Now Census Magic is one that I've used for many years. I mean, we had this ground bait years ago when we first started using Census, and it's a very, very good ground bait for catching roach and skimmers. Again, it's quite coarse, it's not a fine mix. If I were fishing on a canal, fine mixes is good, but today I'm fishing on a big river, a lot of flow, I want quite big particles in the mix. Also with the Magic as well, it's not so sticky, it doesn't stick together, so it works perfectly on a feeder. Today I'm expecting to catch a lot of fish on the drop. I'm going to be fishing with quite a long tail on the feeder rig, and the ground bait wants to release from the feeder very quickly. If you had a sticky mix, then the mix wouldn't release. I want to catch fish on the drop. When my feeder hits the bottom, I want that to be exploding out of the feeder. And Magic is perfect for that. The Census Magic is again from the classic range of ground baits that Census do. It's got a chocolatey quite a chocolatey, quite smell to it. And this ground bait, it was fantastic for skimmers in its early days, but we also use it for roach as well. So that's your sensus magic. So I'm just going to add a bag of that. 2 bags of ground bait is quite enough for what I want to use today. So I'm just going to put them 2 bags to one side. If I was fishing this river quite different and fishing for bigger fish, and I wanted the feeder to hit the bottom and the feeder to hold the ground bait in a little bit longer, what I could do was add river to that mix. Again, river's from the classic range, but just half a bag of river in this mix would totally change it, where you could make it more sticky. But today I'm fishing for all kinds of fish. I want to catch roach, perch, skimmers, maybe a bream. So I want that feeder to release. So I'm not going to put the river in today. If I were going to sit and fish for bigger fish, I'd just add half a bag of river to the mix. So now I can mix them 2 ground baits together. Now I've already said I want that ground bait to release very quickly. So I don't want to mix it on the wet side. I want it quite dry. So once I've added the particles to it, today I'm just going to use 3 very simple additives to the ground bait. I'm going to use some dead maggots, where I'm going to add into the mix. Also some hemp. It's just canned hemp out of a can. It's the Sensus Giant Can Super Hemp. Very, very good for adding to your ground bait when you're fishing for mixed fish. So I've got some hemp where I'm going to add into the ground bait, and also the main ingredient, casters. Casters on this river work extremely well, and I'm expecting to catch quite a few fish on casters on the hook even. So I've got 2 hook baits. I've got casters, I've got maggots. The hemp is an additive to the ground bait to keep fish in the peg. Very simple fishing, not complicated at all. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to mix that ground bait together. I don't want to over-wet it. I want that mix to be quite dry. So again, it explodes out of the feeder, because I want to catch these fish on the drop. When you're adding water to ground bait, always use a 3-pint container and just measure out slowly the water into the mix. And you can see that's quite a coarse ground bait, but what it is, it's quite dark. Now I'm going to fish this quite different to what I would do if I were fishing with a pole or fishing with a waggler or any other technique. What I'm going to do, I'm going to get the ground bait, put it in a bowl behind me, and just take out a certain amount to mix in the casters, the maggots and the hemp, because what I want to do, I want a lot of bait mixed into that actual ground bait. If I were to mix it all into the full mix, then the casters would go darker during the day and everything wouldn't work quite as I want it to. So I'm just going to take out a small amount, about 3 pints into a tub, and then mix in the baits and use that, and then as the day goes along, repeat that later on in the session. So once the ground bait's been left now, I'm going to leave it now for about 20 minutes while I finish off rigging up, and we'll come back to this ground bait and just finish off. I want the ground bait quite dry, but I want the particles to be, you know, wetted up. I don't want them so that they're floating down the river, but it still wants to be quite a dry mix so it'll release quickly from the feeder. So let's have a look at the equipment and how I'm going to fish today. I've now got my ground bait. My ground bait I'm just going to leave as it is raw in the bucket. Right, and the reason for this, because I'm adding particles to it, I don't want to, I could actually fish it by just plugging the feeder off with the casters in the middle, but I don't want to do that. I want to spread the casters, hemp and a few dead maggots through the ground bait so that when the feeder releases, there's not just a clump of bait. As the ground bait releases, I want the casters, maggots, hemp to come out and be not all in a tight block. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to measure out just a couple of pints of ground bait into another bowl. Now the beauty of this is, if you waiting for bites and fishing a long period, your casters don't start going dark and start to float. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add casters to that and also hemp. So I've just got a big handful of casters, a big handful of hemp. Now this is also quite important that your ground bait is quite on the dry side, because you're adding wet baits as well to it. And then not so many maggots. I'm wanting to try and catch on casters on hooks, so I'm just putting a smaller handful of maggots in the mix as well. All that I'm going to then mix in. Now then you can assess how much bait you've got to that 2 pints of ground bait. Now when I look at that, I'm not happy with that. I want more bait in it, because I don't think there's enough bait in that. So again, I'm going to take another handful of casters, another handful of hemp, just straining it off so you're getting rid of some of the water. Mix that in again, and a small amount of maggots, and mix it in again. Now that's looking closer to what I want now. I want plenty of bait in the mix. This is a big river, and the amount of bait you're putting in is absolutely nothing to the size of the river that you're fishing, and it gets washed away and fish will eat it very quickly. So again, I assess now how much bait I've got in that. You can see the casters, the maggots, the hemp. I still could put a little bit more in that. So it's just a case of just tickling things along. I've probably put nearly 3/4 pint of casters into the mix now. But this is the process I work through until I'm happy with the amount of bait that I've got in that mix. So that to me is now looking about right. I've got 2 pints of ground bait, about 3/4 pint of hemp, 3/4 pint of casters, and also a few dead maggots, probably about 200 ml of dead maggots. Now you can see there's a lot more particles in that, and that is how I want the ground bait to be. I want plenty of particles in that mix. The ground bait is there to get to bottom, but once it explodes out of the feeder, I want that bait then to be there to the fish. And of course your hook bait will be downstream. What you find is when you're fishing on here, I like to use a hook length of about 80 centimetres, because then the bait is around about 80 centimetres below where the feeder's releasing, so that bait comes to the hook bait. And often the bites come on the drop. So let's have a look at the fishing today and see if I can catch some roach and skimmers. I fished the rod I'm using as well. Again, you need a rod with some backbone to it. And I'm using a Trent Match Pro Super Feeder. Now this rod, it's quite tippy. It's not a stiff rod, but it's a rod where a lot of the action's right at the top where the tip is. I'm using a 3-ounce carbon quiver tip, and I nearly 100% when I come on river, when I'm fishing in this with this technique, I use a 3-ounce carbon tip, because it shows up bites very well, and of course with it being carbon, it's strong enough even when you've got extra flow like I've got today. It still works quite well. You can see bites on it and everything. So I'm using a 3-ounce tip, and the rod's the Match Pro Super Feeder. I mean, Trent does some lovely feeder rods, and this one for Trent I think is probably one of the best ones I've ever used. You can see it's right tippy, right at the end. And you've got plenty of power to punch the feeder out. And of course if you get a slightly bigger fish, and that's just a perch, I can swing that one. If you get a slightly bigger fish, there's plenty of action in the rod to play the fish. Reels as well, you need quite a powerful reel. I'm using a Shimano bait runner. I like to use bait runners on river because you can actually use the bait runner system. And I've actually had it where the feeder's not been holding the bottom, even with 3 ounce of lead on. And what you can do is actually just click the bait runner on. And if you set it, you can see that that's just ticking off. Right, sometimes when you've got extra flow, you can fish and put the bow in and watch the tip to see the bites. So you're actually putting the bow in with the bait runner. Of course, when you get a big enough bow in it, you can then stop it. And that's what I've actually done there. I've paid the line out so that it's now round to the feeder and the feeder's holding bottom. When you've got a massive amount of flow, you can actually fish and still see the bites and pick up on the bites using that bait runner system. Now for about probably 3 hours, and the tide now has turned and has started to run out. And during the session I fished for about an hour and a quarter with the river running back from right to left. And then it started to ebb and slow up, and you were almost fishing with nearly no bend in the quiver tip as the tide slowed, and almost stood for a short period. Now since then it's started running out again, and it's now, because we've had a real high tide, it's running really quick. It's a fair pace. I'm even struggling to hold bottom with 3 ounce of lead on the feeder. I'm getting bites, I mean that's rag then. I'm getting bites off small fish, off dace and perch and roach. I've had one hybrid, that's all, but just fishing a single maggot on a light 16. I'm fishing a 16 Drennan supercarbon maggot hook, just a single maggot. I've managed to keep odd bites coming, but now because the river's flowing really strong, I'm really having to put quite a big bow in the line. Even though I'm only chucking a third, the river's pulling really strong because it's been quite a high tide. I think down at Gainsborough it's been a 6 metre plus tide. So I'm having to really feed out quite a lot of line to get the feeder to hold bottom. Now it's not really a problem because the bow of the line to the feeder, you still see the bites, but of course because you're not tight to the feeder you can hold bottom. Even paying a bow out like that, I'm really struggling to get it to hold. Even with 3 ounce of lead, it could probably do with a clip on the line. But there's still odd fish there. I'm still getting odd bites, and that's again another fish. The bites have not been like they were a couple of weeks when I fished here. I think because there's a lot of smaller fish, dace and smaller roach, I've had quite a few funny bites, and that's just a small dace. But all the time I've managed to keep putting an odd fishing net, and I'm just building a nice weight. I think the main thing that is to have a look at the rig that I'm using today. I think the rig is so important when it's flowing like this. And I'll just have this cast again, and then I think we'll have a look at the rig and I'll explain how it works. And this is a rig that I've used for years on the river. It's one that I came up with when I was fishing on a stretch called Long Higgin, and we were catching loads of small silver bream. When I say loads, you'd catch probably 80-90 fish for sort of £15. It really was good fishing. That were a bite again on drop then, but it's not on that one. It really was really good fishing, but we used to miss a lot of bites, so I played around with different rigs, and the rig I came up with is what I'm actually fishing with now, and I've fished with on the river for probably the last 20 years really. It's a fantastic little rig, but it's a bolt rig where the fish actually hooks themselves. And I'll just have another cast, see if I can just catch another fish, and then when I come back I'll explain how to actually tie the rig. I think the best thing for me to do is probably cut the rig off and then run you through how to actually tie this rig. It's not that it's complicated, but just getting your head around how it works is probably quite important. It's a little bolt rig where often on your tip you see it bounce same as it did then, and often that's a signal that fish is on. Because what happens on this bolt rig, that the feeder can move on the line just a short way, and you get that bounce as the fish hits the actual knot in the rig, and the fish hooks itself. It's a cracking way of fishing, especially when there's a lot of small fish. I mean, I've used it for bream as well on the river, but often when there's small fish, it's a cracking rig, because you come back with a fish nearly every cast. It does really work well, even for small days. So what I'll do, I'll talk you through how I actually tie the rig. Now, just to explain to you what I've got a diamond-eyed swivel on the rig and a knot above it with twisted line. So you can imagine when that feeder's in the water, it can slide. You get that where you get the peck of the bite, and then the hook themselves again the knot. So the diamond-eyed swivel actually hits that knot. Now it can actually come above it. So when you actually hook a bigger fish, you're not actually playing the feeder as well. So it's a cracking little rig. You've just got that period there where the feeder can move on the line, and of course when that diamond-eyed swivel hits that knot, that's what helps to hook the fish. So what I'll do, I'll show you how to tie this rig. When you're fishing with a ground bait feeder or a maggot feeder, it is a real cracking rig. I'll take my hook length off. I'm just fishing with 013, well it's actually 129 supplex, but near enough 013. Right, if I bite the rig off above, I'm not actually fishing to a clip when I'm fishing this feeder. I'm casting almost by memory to the same spot. And the reason for this is because if you're fishing on a river, often you want to pale out more line to create a bow, or you might want to tighten right up to the feeder. So fishing with a clip is very, very difficult. So you've almost got to cast to the spot that you're wanting to fish. Now to tie this rig, the first thing, the feeder's got the diamond-eyed swivel on it to power gum, just a Drennan 14-pound power gum. I've got a 3-ounce feeder. This feeder's had quite a battering now. It's been online for quite a while, and you can see it's marked on bottom where it's been on the bottom. So I've got a short length of power gum above that. Right, so then I just put the feeder onto the line. I'm using 6-pound feeder and method mono, which is quite strong, but of course what you've got also is the right size knot as well. So I've put the feeder on the line and just let that slide up the line. Now the next thing to put on the line is a bead. Now I use a bead rather than using any other way of connecting, because I found with a small bead that you don't get as many tangles. If you use swivels or anything, I've found that you get a few tangles. So I'd rather use a small bead as a stop. It's just a bead that I use for slider fishing, just a plastic bead. So I slide that then up to the feeder. The next thing then, I just get a census loop tire and tie a loop. I fold the line back and tie a small loop with a census loop tire, just twice round. Right, once I've got the loop in the line, that's to attach my hook length to. Now simply then, all I do, I bring that bead down, right down to that knot, and then spin both lines. Now once you spin both lines together, you can pull that right down to the actual bead and spin it up. So I'm actually spinning both pieces of line. Now once I've spun that line up, every time I keep pulling it down to the bead just to tighten it up so that it's really, really a tight boom. You can see that. Right, once I've got that, then all I do, I go through twice a double overhand knot. Right, just going through twice, and then knot it off about sort of 2 inch. I like to fish about a 2-inch boom. Right, once that's knotted off, pull it tight. Right, and then using a pair of scissors, I clip it real short up to the knot. Right, so that's the actual feeder rig tied, as simple as that. Now you can see once that feeder then is on the line, you've got that distance a couple of inch and you've got that knot to actually hook the fish. It is a real cracking way of fishing, because that can slide over if you hook a big fish, but of course that diamond-eyed swivel bangs against that knot to hook the fish. If you think about it, because you're paying out line and the line's downstream from the feeder, that feeder, when that's pulled through, cannot pass that knot, so it hooks the fish virtually every time. If they're small dace, you're going to miss a few bites, or small fish, but if they're a reasonable stamp, you very rarely miss the bite, because you can see them pick it up, hook themselves on knot, and the tip just bounces and you wind them in. So then the hook length, I'm just fishing with a size 16, if I can find it, see it, a size 16 Drennan Super Carbon maggot hook. About an 80 centimetre hook length. I think a metre's a little bit long. If you're missing bites, sometimes I'll cut that hook length down a little bit, but starting about 80 centimetres seems about right. And I'm just fishing a 129 suplex hook length. So that's the rig actually completed. So very simple, but works extremely well when you're catching all sorts of sizes of fish. So I'm just fishing either a single dead maggot seems good, or a single live maggot. And literally just coming back with your fish. I mean, you've got to bear in mind that the competition at the weekend on here, only £9 I think, actually won this section in the competition I fished at the weekend. So it is quite difficult fishing at the moment because the river's very clear. But of course today we've had a slightly higher tide, so it's been reasonable fishing. I've had some nice roach, I've had a couple of pommies and silver bream, and then a few perch, but I've had bites for probably, I actually had a bite there as it hit bottom. What you're doing, you're fishing on drop all the time. That's what I'm basically doing. I missed that bite. As soon as that feeder hits the bottom, you can imagine your hook baits coming down with the ground bait. This is why it's so important to have the ground bait coming out of the feeder, using quite a dry mix with loads of particles in. And I've explained to you this morning about the ground bait and how important it is for it to come out of that feeder. If you use a sticky type mix, it doesn't work quite right, but using the Census Brown Crumb and also the Magic Mix Dry, it works fantastic. Because the flow's picked up, it's quite difficult now to hold bottom. But by paying out line and leaving a bow in it, you can get it to actually hold. I'm having to put quite a big bow in it to get even a 3-ounce feeder to hold. It will slow down a little bit as pace starts to drop off a little bit, probably in another sort of 20 minutes. It'll start to slow down a little bit and allow me to hold better where I'm fishing. Even catching small dace like this on a feeder, it's amazing, you know, how you can build a weight up. I mean, that's probably a little bit smaller than what I've caught earlier. But it really is a great way of fishing, and what you're doing really is working very hard. I mean, you saw this morning that I started off with 2 pints of ground bait, with probably 3/4 of a pint of casters, 3/4 of a pint of hemp, and a good helping of dead maggots in it. And within an hour I'd put all that in, because I'd been casting literally all the time, letting the feeder hit the bottom. And if I got a bite almost straight away coming back with a fish, or if I didn't get a bite, just leaving it maybe 60 seconds, 80 seconds, and then winding in and starting again. Really looking to catch fish all the time on the drop and working hard to get a good base down. This is a big river, and without an amount of bait in your peg, it's very, very difficult to catch a weighty fish. So you have to work at your fishing. That has been another absolute cracking day's fishing. I've kept it very simple. I've used one rod all day. I've just used a ground bait feeder on a little sliding rig, so the fish hook themselves, a bolt rig. And I've put through the feeder about close to 1.5 kilos of ground bait, about 2.5 pints of casters, 2 or 3 pints of hemp, a few maggots, and caught with either caster on the hook or maggot. The main thing today has been casting regular. To get through that amount of ground bait and bait, you're fishing on a big river. The River Trent's a big river. You have to keep the bait going in. And the wild fish, they're swimming past you all the time. So if you keep feeding, the fish will come to you. I've also fished quite a long hook length, about 80 centimetres, to fish on the drop. Fishing quite light lines, only 0.13 hook length and a size 16 hook. It's been a real cracking day's fishing. Let's have a look at the fish that I've caught.